Single mom shamed for selling treats to support her son, but a billionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain lashed mercilessly against the asphalt of bustling Manhattan as a young 30-year-old single mom nervously adjusted the strap of the plastic bag carrying her homemade cookies. Her fingers trembled, not only from the cold, but also from the anxiety that consumed her with each step toward the upscale financial district. Her little 4-year-old boy walked beside her, holding tightly to her free hand, his big, curious eyes observing the imposing buildings that rose like giants of glass and steel around them. She had lost her job at the garment factory 3 months ago when the company decided to cut costs and lay off its longest-serving employees. Since then, selling her homemade chocolate chip and peanut butter cookies had become her only source of income, a daily struggle against the hunger and despair that threatened to engulf her small family. The rent on their tiny Brooklyn apartment was overdue, and the bills piled up on the kitchen table like cruel reminders of her precarious situation. On that particularly difficult afternoon, she had decided to try her luck in the financial district, where well-dressed executives hurried between important meetings. Maybe someone would take pity on her situation and buy her cookies, allowing her to bring home at least enough for dinner. But the looks she received were of pure contempt, as if her mere presence sullied the elegance of the environment. As she approached the entrance of one of the most imposing buildings, a group of men in expensive suits blocked her path. The group's leader, a middle-aged executive with an arrogant expression, pointed at her with evident disgust. "What do you think you're doing here, you bum?" The words cut through the air like knives, causing her to recoil instinctively. "This place isn't for people like you. We're going to call security if you don't leave immediately." The single mom's heart raced as she tried to explain that she just wanted to sell her cookies, but the men's cruel laughter drowned out her trembling voice. One of them purposefully kicked her bag, scattering cookies across the wet pavement. The boy started to cry, clinging to his mother's legs as she knelt desperately to collect the ruined treats. "Look, she even brought the brat to play the pity card," another executive sneered, prompting more laughter from the group. "How pathetic! People like that should be banned from this area." Tears mingled with the rain on her face as she struggled to gather the pieces of her dignity along with the mud-stained cookies. Her only hope of earning money that day had been destroyed by those men's cruelty, and now she would have to return home empty-handed, not knowing how she would explain to her son that there would be no dinner again. From the top floor of the imposing office building, through the panoramic window of his luxurious office, the 30-year-old billionaire observed the entire scene with growing indignation. His dark eyes blazed with contained fury as he recognized some of the men humiliating the woman as employees of partner companies. His jaw tightened when he saw the boy crying, a sight that stirred painful memories of his own childhood. He was known throughout the city for his striking good looks and suave demeanor, characteristics that had earned him countless business magazine covers and a reputation as a ruthless playboy. But behind this facade of confidence, he carried deep scars left by his parents' traumatic divorce and the subsequent destruction of his family. He had inherited a restaurant empire after his father's untimely death, a fortune built on investments in stocks and holdings that generated substantial monthly dividends. The scene on the sidewalk awakened a specific and painful memory, his own mother being mistreated by the abusive man she had married after the divorce. He was only 16 years old when he witnessed that humiliation, feeling too powerless to defend her. The guilt of not being able to protect the woman he loved most in the world still haunted him, even years after her recovery and fresh start. Without a second thought, he abandoned the important meeting he was about to begin and descended the 15 floors using the stairs, his adrenaline pumping with each step. When he emerged onto the sidewalk, the executives were still there, laughing at the situation, while the single mum finished picking up her ruined cookies. "Gentlemen," his voice cut through the air with absolute authority, causing everyone to turn instantly. Recognition was immediate on their faces, followed by the dread of being caught in such an act of cruelty by the most powerful man in that part of the city. "Mr. the group's leader stammered, his arrogance evaporating completely. You were humiliating a mother and her son," he interrupted with glacial coldness. "You know my reputation in business. Imagine what I can do to your careers." The men dispersed quickly, muttering pathetic apologies as they fled like cowards. The billionaire then turned to the single mom, who was watching him with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. She had recognized the man from the financial pages of the newspapers, but couldn't understand why someone so powerful would care about her situation. "Allow me to help you," he said softly, kneeling to be at the boy's level and offering his clean handkerchief to dry his childish tears. "My name doesn't matter now, but I can offer something better than these men's compassion." He looked her directly in the eyes, seeing there a strength that adversity hadn't completely broken. "I need someone to supply cookies for my restaurants. Your products have a handcrafted quality that my customers would appreciate. How about we discuss a partnership?" The single mom hesitated, her mind working furiously to process the surreal situation. Part of her suspected that this was just disguised pity, an elegant handout from someone who felt guilty for witnessing her humiliation. But when she looked at her son, who had stopped crying and was now watching the man with childish curiosity, she realized that she had no choice but to accept any opportunity that came her way. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice still trembling. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" The billionaire stood up slowly, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, and because some wounds only heal when we help others heal theirs." The words carried a weight that she couldn't fully decipher, but something in the sincerity of his voice convinced her that the offer was genuine. When he extended an elegant business card, she accepted it with still trembling hands, unaware that this moment would change their lives in ways that neither of them could imagine. 3 weeks had passed since the encounter on the sidewalk, and the single mom's life had taken a completely unexpected turn. The contract that the billionaire had offered was not only real, but surprisingly generous. She now supplied cookies to 5 of his restaurants spread across the city, producing gourmet chocolate chip, peanut butter, and oatmeal raisin cookies that quickly became a sensation among sophisticated patrons. The small apartment where they lived had been transformed into an impromptu bakery. The kitchen table, once occupied by overdue bills, was now covered in high-quality ingredients that he had insisted on providing. Belgian chocolate, premium peanut butter, imported oats. Luxuries that she had never imagined being able to use in her recipes. The money she received weekly was more than she earned in 2 months at the garment factory. But the financial change brought with it an emotional tension that she didn't know how to process. The billionaire appeared in person to pick up the orders, always polite and respectful, but there was something in his eyes that made her deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't predatory desire, as she was used to facing, but an emotional intensity that made her question her own reactions. During one of those visits, while she was carefully packing a box of chocolate chip cookies, the boy ran to the man with a drawing scribbled on construction paper. It was a childlike portrait of a family, a woman, a tall man, and a small child, all holding hands under a disproportionate yellow sun. "It's for you," the boy said shyly, extending the paper. "Mommy said you're our friend now." The billionaire accepted the drawing with reverent care, his hands trembling imperceptibly. The single mom watched his reaction and saw something break momentarily in his controlled expression. For an instant, he was no longer the powerful businessman, but just a man touched by a child's innocence. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever received," he murmured, kneeling to the boy's height. "Can I hang it in my office?" From that moment on, the visits became more frequent and prolonged. He started arriving in the late afternoon, when production slowed down, and invariably ended up staying for dinner. The boy became increasingly attached to the man, asking questions about fancy cars, telling school stories, and asking for help with more elaborate drawings. She watched these interactions with a heavy heart. It was impossible to deny that her son was lacking a father figure, and the billionaire filled that void with surprising ease. But at the same time, a voice in her mind constantly warned her about the dangers of allowing them to get used to that temporary situation. "Why do you do this?" she asked one night after the boy fell asleep on the living room couch. They were washing dinner dishes together, a domesticity that frightened her by how easily it had settled between them. "What, exactly?" he replied, avoiding her gaze as he dried a plate with unnecessary attention. "All this kindness, the generous contract, the visits, the patience with my son." She stopped scrubbing the pan and stared directly at him. "Men like you don't do that without hidden motives." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he placed the plate in the sink and turned to face her, his eyes reflecting a vulnerability that she never expected to see. "My parents divorced when I was 16, he began slowly. "It was brutal, full of accusations and heartache. My mother was shattered, vulnerable. She met a man who promised to take care of her, but he actually destroyed her even more." She remained silent, feeling that any word could interrupt the confession that he seemed to need to make. "I saw her being humiliated, mistreated, reduced to nothing, and I didn't do anything to stop it because I was too young, too cowardly." His voice became hoarser. "When I saw you on that sidewalk, being treated that way, it was like seeing my mother again. I couldn't just walk by." The revelation left her speechless. For weeks she had built theories about his motives, from disguised charity to some inappropriate romantic interest. She never imagined that behind his actions there was such a deep and personal wound. "And now?" she asked softly. "What happens when you consider that you've paid your emotional debt?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. It was almost 10 o'clock at night, an unusual time for visitors. The single mom opened the door and found an elegant woman, impeccably dressed, wearing expensive clothes and jewelry that shone even in the dim light of the hallway. "Who are you?" asked the visitor with evident arrogance, pushing her way into the apartment uninvited. The billionaire appeared behind her, and his expression changed dramatically as he recognized the newcomer. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for my husband," the woman replied with calculated coldness. "Imagine my surprise to discover where you've been spending your nights." The single mom felt the world spin as she understood the situation. "Husband," she repeated, her voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "Ex-husband," he corrected quickly, but the damage had already been done. "We've been divorced for 2 years. Technically, yes," the woman smiled maliciously, "but you know very well that our separation was never definitive, especially considering certain information I possess about your questionable business practices." The tension in the small apartment became suffocating. The single mom watched the exchange of loaded glances between the two, perceiving undercurrents of conflict that went far beyond a simple divorce. The elegant woman clearly wasn't there by coincidence, and her words carried the weight of veiled threats. "You had no right to involve innocent people in this," he said, his voice low but laden with contained fury. "Innocent?" The ex-wife laughed bitterly. "She may even be naive, but she certainly isn't innocent. Look around, darling. A desperate single mom, a miserable apartment, a child lacking a father figure. Do you really believe your motives are pure? Or that hers are?" The words hit the single mom like slaps. Every insecurity she had tried to suppress in recent weeks came to the surface with devastating force. It was true that she had started to depend on him in ways that went beyond financial. It was true that her son had become dangerously attached. And it was true that she herself had developed feelings that she was desperately trying to deny. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "Both of you, get out now." "No," he protested, taking a step towards her. "You don't understand. She's manipulating the situation to show you the truth," the ex-wife interrupted gently. "That you're a powerful man playing with the lives of vulnerable people, whether it's out of guilt, boredom, or something worse." The single mum felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to shed them in front of that woman. "The contract is cancelled. I don't want any more of your money, your pity, or your psychological games." "You're making a mistake," he pleaded, completely ignoring the presence of the ex-wife. "Let me explain." "The explanation is simple," she interrupted him, opening the apartment door. "I'm an idiot who believed that someone like you could be genuinely interested in someone like me, but your ex-wife is right. This is all just a game for you bored rich people." He left the apartment reluctantly, but not before casting a warning look at the ex-wife. She followed him with a satisfied smile, stopping only to whisper a few final words to the single mom. "You made the right choice. Men like him don't change. They just find new ways to feel better about themselves." When the door closed, the single mom slid down its back to the floor, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. In the living room, her son was still sleeping on the couch, oblivious to the fact that the father figure he had begun to love had just disappeared from their lives. The kitchen table was still full of expensive ingredients and half-finished packages, cruel reminders of dreams that lasted only a few weeks. She was back to square one, but now with an additional pain, the certainty that she had allowed both herself and her son to become attached to an illusion. Reality hit with full force. People from different worlds don't mix, and when they try, it's always the one with less who pays the highest price. 2 months had passed since the night everything fell apart, and the single mum's life had become a constant nightmare. Without the restaurant contract, she had returned to the desperate routine of trying to sell cookies on the streets. But now she faced an additional obstacle. The landlord had increased the rent by 60%, claiming neighborhood improvements that never happened. The skinny man with small eyes who collected the rent appeared punctually on the 5th of each month, always accompanied by 2 thugs who made a point of intimidating her with menacing looks. On the last visit, he had been more direct about his intentions. "Listen, girl, I'm going to be clear with you," he said as he examined his dirty fingernails with contempt. "This neighborhood is being gentrified. People like you are hindering progress. If you can't pay the new amount, you better start looking for another place." She had tried to argue, to show that she had always paid on time, that she was an exemplary tenant, but her words fell on deaf ears. The worst part was the growing certainty that this pressure was not a coincidence. Since the billionaire left her life, a series of small persecutions had begun. The store where she bought cheap ingredients stopped giving her credit. Neighbors who were once friendly became hostile, and even the opportunities to sell on the streets seemed systematically blocked. Her son had begun to show worrying signs of anxiety. He woke up crying during the night, calling for the handsome man who used to visit them, and had developed the habit of constantly drawing the same tall male figure next to his representations of the family. During the day, he remained quieter than usual, as if he instinctively realized that their lives had returned to their previous precariousness. One particularly difficult morning, while she was trying to sell her last cookies in Central Park, an elegant woman approached. It was the city's most respected investigative journalist, known for her courageous stories about corruption and social injustices. "You're the mum who was involved with the restaurant tycoon, aren't you?" she asked directly, without beating around the bush. The single mom's heart raced. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do, and you also know that your current situation isn't a coincidence." The journalist pulled up a bench and sat next to her. "I received an anonymous tip about real estate speculation practices in this neighborhood. Your name was on the list of tenants being pressured to move out." The revelation left her stunned. For weeks, she had attributed her difficulties to bad luck or the natural consequences of losing the restaurant contract. She never imagined that she could be the target of an organized persecution. Who would do this? Why? She murmured, more to herself than to the journalist. "That's exactly the question I intend to answer, but I need your help. I need you to tell me everything about your relationship with him, about the people involved, about when these pressures began." During the next 3 hours, sitting on that bench while her son played nearby, she told the whole story. From the encounter on the sidewalk to the devastating visit of the ex-wife, every detail was meticulously noted by the journalist, who asked precise questions and seemed to know more about the situation than she initially appeared to. "There's something you need to know," said the journalist when she finished her account. "The tycoon isn't just suffering from the loss of the contract with you. Since that night, he had lost 3 major investors and 2 significant business deals. Someone is systematically destroying both his life and mine." The information caught her completely off guard. During all that time of suffering, she had assumed that he had simply moved on, relieved to be rid of the inconvenient involvement with a working-class woman. Knowing that he was also suffering consequences brought a confusing mix of satisfaction and concern. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked suspiciously. "Because I believe you are both pawns in a much bigger game. And because your story may be the key to exposing a network of corruption that affects dozens of families in this city." That same afternoon, the journalist took her to meet other victims of the same scheme. In a small community hall in the basement of a church in Queens, she found 15 families facing similar situations: abusive rent increases, pressure to sell properties below market value, small businesses being systematically sabotaged. An elderly lady recounted how her family bakery, operating for 40 years in the same location, was forced to close after suppliers mysteriously cancelled contracts and the city health department found alleged sanitary violations that never existed. A young father reported how he lost his job at a company where he had worked for 10 years, shortly after refusing to sell his house for a third of its real value. All the cases had the same pattern: coordinated pressure, suspicious timing, and always involving properties in areas that were being gentrified by urban development projects. The single mom realized that her personal story was just a small piece of a much larger and more sinister puzzle. During the following weeks, she became an active part of the investigation. Her experience at the garment factory had taught her how to organize documents, and her desperate situation motivated her to work tirelessly collecting evidence. She coordinated meetings with other victims, organized depositions, and gradually discovered that she possessed a natural talent for detecting inconsistencies in official reports. It was during one of these investigations that she uncovered the most shocking connection. The company responsible for the abusive rent increases and real estate pressures was partially funded by funds controlled by the family of the billionaire's ex-wife. The dividends and profits generated by these predatory practices financed the woman's luxurious lifestyle and that of her associates. The revelation completely changed her perspective on recent events. That night's visit had not been motivated by jealousy or romantic possessiveness, but by a calculated strategy to destroy any relationship that could interfere with the family's real estate speculation plans. She and the tycoon weren't just victims of circumstance, but specific targets of an operation aimed at eliminating obstacles to profit. Even more disturbing was discovering that the billionaire's late father had been one of the first victims of the same scheme years before. Documents obtained through the investigation showed that he had tried to denounce the corrupt practices, but died suddenly of a heart attack caused by the stress of the threats and blackmail he had suffered. The inheritance that the son believed he had received naturally had, in fact, been the result of a desperate struggle against the same people who were now persecuting them. The discovery came through a box of documents that the mother of another investigated party had kept for years, fearing that they might be important someday. Among old contracts and correspondence, she found letters that the billionaire's father had written to authorities, denouncing extortion and real estate speculation practices that affected small business owners in the region. When she read those letters aloud to the group, the silence in the hall was absolute. Everyone understood that they were facing not just greedy opportunists, but people capable of systematically destroying lives to protect their financial interests. "We need to take this to him," said the journalist after the group dispersed. "He has a right to know the truth about his father's death." The single mom hesitated. During all those months of suffering, she had convinced herself that he was just another rich man playing with other people's feelings. Discovering that both were victims of the same enemy changed everything, but also frightened her deeply. What if he doesn't believe it? What if he thinks I'm making this up to try to get back into his life? Then you show him the evidence and let him decide. But you have a moral obligation to tell the truth, not just to him, but to all the families who are still suffering. That night, alone in her apartment while her son slept, she held the phone for hours without being able to dial the number she had memorized during the weeks when they worked together. The courage that she had demonstrated during the investigation seemed to evaporate when it came to confronting her own feelings. But when she looked at her son, who even in his sleep was still holding one of the drawings of the handsome man, she knew that she had no choice. The truth needed to be revealed, not just for justice, but because some wounds only heal when we confront those who cause them. The meeting was set at a neutral coffee shop in Midtown, far from both her apartment and his office. The single mom arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time, carrying a folder with all the evidence she had collected during months of investigation. Her hands trembled as she organized the documents for the 10th time, trying to find the courage for what she was about to do. When he appeared in the doorway of the coffee shop, she almost didn't recognize him. The confident and elegant man she had known had been replaced by someone visibly shaken. He had lost weight, had deep circles under his eyes, and his posture no longer demonstrated the natural authority that had once characterized him. Upon seeing her, his eyes filled with an emotion that she couldn't decipher completely. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, sitting down cautiously across from her. "I know I have no right to ask for anything after what happened." "You don't understand," she interrupted gently. "It's me who needs to apologize, and I need to tell you truths that will change everything you believe about your past." During the next hour, she methodically presented all the evidence she had uncovered. She showed documents that proved the connection between the ex-wife's family and the real estate speculation scheme, the letters that his father had written denouncing the same corrupt practices, and the medical reports that suggested that the stress of the threats had contributed directly to the fatal heart attack. He listened in absolute silence, his expression passing from shock to fury, then to deep pain. When she finished, his hands were shaking so much that he could barely hold the paper she had given him. "My father," he murmured with a broken voice. "He tried to protect me and I never knew. I thought he had died simply because he couldn't cope with the divorce." "He died fighting the same people who are destroying us now," she said gently. "And you inherited not only his fortune, but also the war he was fighting." The revelation broke something fundamental inside him. For years, he had carried the guilt of not having prevented his parents' suffering, not knowing that his father had been a silent hero, trying to protect not only his own family, but an entire community of vulnerable people. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. "After everything that's happened, why would you risk reaching out to me?" "Because I discovered that true love isn't just about feelings. It's about justice, about doing what's right, even when it's costly." She took a deep breath before continuing. "And because my son still draws you every day, and because I myself never managed to stop feeling that there was something incomplete between us." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with months of pain, regret, and repressed hope. He reached his hand across the table, touching hers lightly, and for the first time in months, she didn't withdraw it. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We fight," she replied with determination. "Together. Not just for us, but for all the families who are suffering what we suffered." The following weeks were a whirlwind of coordinated activity. He used his financial resources and business connections to amplify the journalistic investigation, while she organized the victims into a cohesive and articulate group. Her son, realizing that the handsome man had returned to their lives, blossomed again, becoming an unexpected source of motivation for both of them. The first victory came when they managed to freeze all abusive rent increases until the investigation was concluded. The second was the discovery of a disgruntled employee of the real estate speculation company who agreed to provide internal evidence in exchange for legal protection. But the ex-wife and her family did not passively accept the exposure of their schemes. They tried legal intimidation, offered bribes, and finally resorted to direct threats. It was during one of these intimidation attempts that something definitive changed between the single mom and the billionaire. She was leaving a meeting with other victims when 3 men cornered her in a deserted parking lot. They didn't use physical violence, but made it clear that she should abandon the investigation if she wanted her son to grow up safely. When she arrived home, trembling and traumatized, she found him waiting at the door of her apartment. "They won't stop," she said, collapsing into his arms for the first time since they met. "I'm putting my son in danger because of this fight." "No," he held her firmly, his own fury boiling. "You're protecting your son. You're teaching him that some things are worth fighting for, even when it's hard." That night he didn't leave. He stayed on the couch, standing guard, while she and the boy slept. And it was during those silent hours of vigil that he understood that his feelings for her had completely transcended the circumstances that brought them together. It was no longer about guilt, redemption, or even physical attraction. It was about recognizing in her the strength, courage, and integrity that he had always wanted to have. The investigation culminated 6 months later with the publication of a series of devastating reports that exposed the entire real estate speculation scheme. The evidence was irrefutable. Internal documents, recordings of conversations, financial records that showed how entire families had been systematically destroyed to generate obscene profits. The repercussion was immediate and massive. The ex-wife and 3 members of her family were arrested in a coordinated operation that also resulted in the seizure of millions in illegally obtained assets. More importantly, all the affected families received compensation and were able to return to their normal lives. During the trial, the single mom testified with courage and clarity that impressed even the most experienced lawyers. She had transformed from a desperate woman struggling to survive into a respected community leader, someone to whom other victims turned when they needed guidance and support. The billionaire watched the entire process with growing pride, recognizing that the woman he had fallen in love with was extraordinary in ways that he had initially failed to perceive. She didn't need his protection or his money. She needed a partner who respected her as an equal and who was willing to fight alongside her for the things that mattered. The declaration of love came on the last day of the trial, outside the courthouse, as journalists and onlookers dispersed. They were alone on the steps, watching the movement of the city that now knew their stories through the newspaper headlines. I know this may seem inappropriate after everything we've been through, he began, turning to face her completely. But I need to tell you that I've fallen in love with you, not with the vulnerable woman I wanted to protect, but with the strong woman who fought by my side, with the courageous mother who didn't back down when threatened, with the person who taught me that true love means fighting together for something bigger than ourselves. She studied him in silence for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, with a smile that completely transformed her expression, she replied, I've fallen in love too, with the man who chose to honor his father's memory by doing what was right, with the man who treats my son as if he were his own, with the man who discovered that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the courage to defend those who cannot defend themselves. The kiss that followed was witnessed only by the distant city and by a small boy who peeked through the window of the apartment where they now lived together, a radiant smile illuminating his face as he finally realized the drawing he had made so many times. A complete family, united by love and the courage to do what was right. 2 years later, they were married in a simple ceremony in the same church where they met the other victims of the speculation scheme. All the families who had fought together were present, celebrating not only the union of two people who loved each other, but the victory of justice over greed, of community over individualism, and of love over fear. The single mum had officially become the coordinator of a housing rights protection organization, a job that fulfilled her deeply and allowed her to continue helping families in situations similar to the one she had faced. The billionaire had transformed his restaurants into a network of social enterprises that preferentially employed people in vulnerable situations, proving that it was possible to be financially successful without exploiting the weakest. And the boy, now 6 years old, grew up in a home full of love, justice, and purpose, carrying within himself the certainty that, even when the world seems unjust and cruel, there are always people willing to fight to make it better. His drawings now included not only his family, but all the other families who had been saved by the courage of two adults who discovered that true love always requires courage to fight for what is right. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment giving a score from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.